Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, March 1st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game is in 183 days, the game against Michigan in 274 days. We are also continuing our countdown to spring football on today's show. We're talking to our buddy Ross Fulton, the X's and O's guru at BuckeyeHuddle.com, to find out. You've heard what I am interested in watching this spring. Now let's hear what everyone's smart football friend is interested in watching this spring, because there's a lot of fascinating storylines. Today we're going to be talking about the offense. And of course, when we talk to Ross, we are sponsored by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus today. All right, so we're going to be talking about the offense today, what we're most interested in seeing, and there's new personnel, there's potentially maybe a tweak in the scheme, there's guys who are maybe shifting positions, there's all sorts of stuff to talk about in the offense. But Ross, it feels like we got to start. Let's start at the top of the offense with the new offensive coordinator, Chip Kelly. How different do you think things might look this spring with Chip Kelly there running the offense with Ryan Day?
That's what I'm interested in finding out. I would say that's at the top of the list. I think that it is in a couple of dimensions. I mean, so when when Ryan Day had his last press conference, when Bill O'Brien was still the offensive coordinator, he talked about it being the Ohio State offense with elements added in from Bill O'Brien. Now with Chip Kelly, as we've discussed, there's a lot more overlap between what Ryan Day does and what Chip Kelly does. But I think to the extent what I'll be looking for right away is how much different is the run game. And that's at a couple different dimensions. That's both in terms of the play usage and we've talked about Chip Kelly's using a more diverse run game, plays like pin and pull, for instance, which were an element of what Ohio State's done in the past, but a much more constant part of Chip Kelly's offense and has been for a long time. His sweep play where he pulls two linemen and blocks down. So there's things like that, but then also like formationally, I think will be interesting as well. One thing Chip Kelly did in response to some of the issues he had in the NFL in terms of being predictable by tendencies was that he at UCLA started using a lot more same side runs. So just by that, I mean that running the ball to the side the halfback lines up on and shotgun, because obviously I think we've talked about before, if you can become predictable, especially in 11 personnel by where the tight end and running back are, because you can only run certain things. But Chip Kelly did a good job at UCLA, at least of, like for instance, that same side sweep play, like he would run it to the side the running back was on. And so you change up the steps for the running back, but it's still the same for the offensive line. And that, helps break tendencies, or, he'd run power to the side of the running back. And so that would be an area as well that I'm looking at. I would also, then we'll see some of how much are they going to incorporate the Q read into the mix, particularly Q read run play. So, right, reading a defender, and the quarterback has the option to give or keep. I wouldn't expect at least like to see a lot of quarterbacks keeping, whether it's in the spring game or open practice sessions, but like you'll still be able to tell somewhat whether it's a live read. Another thing Chip Kelly has done is like he's good at changing up who is read to keep the defense off balance. So like it won't just be the defensive end every time on a zone read. Like they'll run an outside zone where they read the defensive tackle. Again, that both changes up the blocking scheme. It lets you get outside, because you're not as worried about a bigger defensive tackle running with the running back, but also just keeps defenders off balance because all of a sudden they're not blocked. So how much are they doing that? Changing up who's being read. And then I guess that the fourth thing I'd add to that is personnel too. So another thing we saw from Chip Kelly at UCLA was a lot more use of heavy personnel than he had used in the past. That came in the form both of using two tight ends, but also like bringing wide receivers in tight and using them, for instance, like if you're running counter tray, using one of the wide receivers as the pull and leading. And I do think that creates an interesting dynamic for Ohio State because like last year, I would say the tight end is probably the weakest position group on the offense, whereas wide receiver is the strongest. So it's like, how much do they really want to use 12 personnel? When they do, can the tight ends block better than they did last year? And, I think that conversely, Emeka Ibuka has the size and to sort of fill that role of playing tight and being a, blocker accounted for in the tackle box. Ohio State actually did do a little bit of that last year with him on split blocks and the like. So looking for whether that role increases. So those are sort of the things that jump to the top of my mind on the offense.
And then as far as the run game, one thing that's really interesting to me is, we're talking about the changing, what they might do differently on the run game. And there's some stuff that, hey, running the same side runs like you talk about, like, sure, you can do that, and that's fine. There are other schematic changes in terms of maybe different types of running, or you can be running more inside versus outside that are contingent potentially in a bunch of different stuff, all of which is potentially a little bit different this year. So you've got some new faces on the offensive line. There's at least one spot open on the offensive line, and we'll see if maybe someone steals, if Seth McLaughlin comes in and steals that starting center job away from Carson Hinsman, and you got the right guard spot open. You got a new quarterback, and it's going to be, they have 5 quarterbacks on the roster this year. It's going to be number 1, a new starting quarterback, and number 2, a running quarterback, which they very much did not have last year. And then number 3, you've also got new running back. You've got Quinshon Judkins on the roster this year. When they're figuring out this spring, hey, here's some stuff that we think we're going to do more of or less of, how much, I'm sure all of those things factor in to some degree or another, but is there one of those that really, hey, we have concerns about the middle of the offensive line, or, hey, the quarterback run really opens up this? Like, which of those factors is maybe the deciding factor in, what they end up doing or not doing? Is there one that's more impactful than others?
I think the quarterback run element is where you start because that impacts how you constrain defenses and what your responses are to defenses, versus using RPOs versus using other heavier personnel. There's different ways to go about this that we've discussed over time, but I think it's how much of a commitment are they going to have to a live quarterback read game as well as quarterback designed run plays. We saw some of that, both of those with Devin Brown last year. And so, I think the Day's offense, I still believe that part of the issue is when you're spread out in the shotgun and you don't have the quarterback read element, it makes you somewhat predictable by formation and alignment, and it makes you somewhat predictable in terms of not being able to account for numbers. And so I think a lot of what Day's offense is designed was the concepts are based upon having a quarterback that can at least serve as a read threat. And so that should make everyone look better because, there were times when the offensive line was blamed. The offensive line got blamed for the tight end blocking, which is like a whole other issue that we've talked about that drives me crazy. But also, when there's unaccounted for defenders, you can only do so much. And so I do think that how much they're going to go back to what I would even consider what they were like with Justin Fields, in 2019, 2020, in terms of just making that an element that defenses have to account for. That's where I would start. And then I think, to your question, the second issue, again, where I'm looking forward when I talked about run game diversity is, how dependent are they still with stretch being their base run play versus a more amalgamation of inside zone, outside zone, power counter, pin and pull, which is sort of like a buck sweep, and duo linebacker. Again, when we talked about the overlap with Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, all those things I just named off are plays that I can show you examples of where Ohio State has run them over the last couple of years. It's just emphasis, right? It's what percentage, some of those plays, like linebacker, for instance, with where what running back steps one way and comes back the other way. It's like an inside zone play, but effectively functions like down block. You'd see it once or twice in a certain game, and then you wouldn't see it again, and Chip Kelly was much more consistent in using a variety of concepts at UCLA. So again, that's I think spring is for installing your base offense. And so that it is somewhat telling what they rely on because that's what they consider the base offense.
And it feels like every time we've talked about Chip Kelly and his potential impact at Ohio State, we've kind of focused on the run game. Are there things that you might see in the pass game this spring that would make you say, okay, that's maybe the Chip Kelly influence in the passing game And, is that based on Chip Kelly's influence, or is that based on, hey, you got a different type of quarterback potentially now?
Yeah, I mean, so somewhat hard to disentangle those, and it's also hard to disentangle that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day's passing games, like if you just pulled their playbooks out, are virtually identical. There might be some different emphasis, like there's certain plays that Chip Kelly loves to run, like wide cross, like deep crossing routes, spacing, snag. But again, these are like all concepts we talked about with Ohio State and Ryan Day all the time. But one thing that I do think Chip Kelly used a little bit more of than Day was like quick game, like tight end stick routes, like sort of 3-step drop concepts where you 5 or 6 yards, hit it quickly. And again, that's like also something that Bill O'Brien used more of than Day. So maybe that's something he's looking to add in the passing game, and something to look for if you see a little bit more quick game concepts. But I think that as I said before, I mean, I think that I would personally say that Ryan Day has been a better developer of the pass game than Chip Kelly has been in their career. So I don't think that's like an area where you will see a tremendous amount of change. And then, I guess it does depend on what they feel that Will Howard's comfortable with as a quarterback, particularly like in terms of RPOs and how much either of them rely upon that.
All right. Well, we will start finding out how much they're going to rely on RPOs and everything else starting next Tuesday when the Buckeyes open the spring practice at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Boy, there's going to be a lot to talk about and a lot to watch and a lot to follow this spring. A lot of interesting positional battles, some schematic changes, much, much more. We're going to be talking on tomorrow's show about the defense and what we're watching for there, so you can look forward to that coming up in about 24 hours. But even before that, you can look forward to a nice trip to Jeff Ruby Steakhouse. Treat yourself. You deserve it. It is the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.